Pinq and Vico have dominated the FNCS qualifiers, winning both of them. So let's take a look at their strategies to dominate against the best players in the world and also answer the question, why they fizz backwards. This team lands at Dumpenhausen, which is a name you don't need to know, but it is this split between Mount Olympus and Reckless Railways, and what you need to know about it is that it is At their main drop spot, there are 4 chests, and then 2 more up at the forecast tower, and finally 1 more down at the dock. This is barely enough loot for a solo, let alone a duo. So how do they make this drop spot work? Well, the first thing that they do is they push very aggressively towards the lake. If it is uncontested, then they get an extra 12 free chests, and if it is contested, then they have an even better plan. Because this lake is such a wide split, duos who land here often loot up very far apart from each other, giving Vico and Pinq an easy opportunity to isolate one player and create a 2v1 where they can get both loot from the players as well as valuable storm surge tags, which will help them later in the game. But what truly makes their drop spot strong is not their aggressive pushes, but actually their close proximity to both the forecast tower and the bunker. They would often make it their #1 priority to get both of these objectives by making large bases either around or on top of these respective objectives. After they set themselves up well off spawn, they often took very aggressive mid-game fights to rack up points and get extra loot. Let's take a look at some of these fights and see what makes this duo so good. Starting off in our first fight, they push a team outside of Reckless Railways. Pinq gets on the duo's tops and Vico goes to drop on their walls. Pinq is pressuring his opponents this way, which means that the defensive duo is likely going to rebox in the opposite direction. They do this exactly, but Vico is already a step ahead as he has positioned himself where this duo needs to rebox in order to quickly put more pressure onto this duo, which results in them quickly going down. Going into our next fight, Vico is a solo and is in a 2v1. He kills the first player by winning a miracle aim duel, but he still has to eliminate the last player with 0 materials to his name. He starts off this engagement by getting a tag onto his enemy before backing off to avoid taking counter damage. He then looks to re-peek his enemy, but he holds onto his wall edit for an extra bit of time to put himself further right. This allows him to use his momentum to swing into the left shoulder peek more than if he had instantly edited the wall. Although taking a left shoulder peek is worse than a right shoulder peek, Vico still makes it work because you can still have an advantage if you peek first because it takes some time for your opponent's game to react to what you do. Unfortunately, his enemy resets the wall right before Vico could get a shot here, but it was still a great play. Vico uses this as a moment to back off and recollect himself before he re-engages the fight. In this time, his enemy has gotten off the res onto his knocked teammate, so Vico is back in a 2v1. He shows 100% confidence in his ability to win this fight despite this disadvantage by quickly jumping back on the wall, and when his opponent tries to make space, Vico perfectly reads it, giving him an easy kill, which he then follows up with by spraying the second player and getting bullets to go through his walls, resulting in 2 easy kills. Moving towards the end game, let's take a look at how they position in the partial zones to give themselves easier rotations in the future zones. When positioning on the partial zones, this team intentionally goes onto the deepest part of the zone in order to be on the complete dead side of the zone. This works for 2 reasons. 1, half the time they have forecast and know the zone is going to play that way anyways, and 2, in the other half of their games, it is still the best position to be in because no matter where the next zone pulls, you almost certainly will have some safe rotation option, as you can use the dead side of the zone to make free rotations into future zones. This team is usually in a good spot going into the end games, usually having solid materials, but they still look for plays that can cap out their materials. They do this by early on in the end game looking for ways that they can surprise their opponents. One way they do this is by using snipers to quickly break enemies' builds and get the surprise on them. Vico does this in game 1 here and drops his opponent into a position where he and Pinq can easily clean them up. They are also constantly looking for teams who are unaware for free refresh opportunities. When they hear in this box that both players are spraying their ARs, they know that neither player will be paying enough attention to stop them, which gives Vico and Pinq the opportunity to open up a pre-edit and get an easy refresh. As the endgame goes on, this team switches their refresh attempts from awareness advantages to positional advantages. They do this in 2 ways. The first is by making large tarps. This gives both players plenty of space to work with and plenty of walls and floors to edit to try and find refreshes. By making these large tarps, they claim large parts of the endgame and make it much harder for other teams to find space in the endgame. The second way they find refreshes is through their positioning. When they are in low mat situations, instead of messing around on the backside of the zone, they use almost all of their mats to make a base at the front side of the zone that they try to fight from. This is great because it keeps them guaranteed safe for a longer period of time and they get guaranteed space to fight from, increasing their odds of a refresh. Unfortunately, in this game, they find a kill but aren't able to get the loot, but it was still a great play regardless. Now let's finally answer the question of the video. Why do Pinq and Vico fizz backwards? When fizzing, the #1 way you die is from someone fizzing behind you and chasing you down with either an SMG or an auto shotgun. If you are anything like me before I watched Pinq and Vico, you might think that you got unlucky or your rotate timing was the reason you died. but there's actually a much simpler fix. Instead of fizzing and looking just straight forward, once you build up your momentum on your jump, you turn around for a second and see if you need to block any of your angles. This prevents opponents from chasing you down, and your rotate distance is the same. Once you block off the correct angles, you can then turn around and figure out what you are going to do when you land again, which is incredibly dependent on the rest of the situation. Let's look at some examples of Vico and Pinq using the strategy to save their games. In game 4, Vico uses his fizz on his 9th zone rotate and looks behind him and sees that a duo wants to chase him down. He reacts to this by simply placing some ramps that completely shut down this opponent's refresh attempt. Beyond their backwards fizzing, this team also uses fizz in extremely useful ways. When they don't like the rotation in front of them, they will often stagger in the back of the zone and then let the lobby get ahead of them. They can then use their fizz to switch layers and find a clear path into the zone. They would also use their fizz on high layers in the late endgame and mirror directly under height. This works because they are on a high layer, meaning there are very few players near them who could shoot them, but usually teams that play high layers get heavily pressured from the high ground. Vico and Pinq avoid this by playing directly under the height team, making it much harder for the high ground to get an angle to spray them. Finally, they used fizz in the late mid game by ramping up a ton, and when they got shot out, they can just fizz jump all the way into the 8th zone. This is the core of their gameplay, but I also want to break down this insane solo clutch from Vico. From this position, Vico has 11 builds and 11 HP, and it is top 7. In this position, it seems like he has no options. He tarps to the 11th zone and runs out of materials, and he is now in a position where he needs to play in order to survive. He starts to look around and spots his only target, a player that is 2 layers above him. Vico realizes that he has the banana effect on, and he can actually reach this, so he goes for a crazy side jump shot and hits this shot. This gives him just enough mass to get all the way into the 11th zone, but he is also 1 HP now. When the 12th zone plays max distance, he knows he can't get shot once, so his first priority is to block off the height team from spraying him. His second priority becomes finding his second refresh. He does this by dropping on the wall of a player who's on the edge of the zone. He knows that this player has to run out of the box soon, so he gets right on his wall and gets a free refresh. At this point, he's able to hold on for one more placement until he dies, but turning this position into literally anything is actually so impressive. This was a breakdown of how Vico and Pinq won both FNCS qualifiers, and if you enjoyed this video, then I also think you'll enjoy when I interviewed Vico in the video on screen. Peace.